This week on the Virtual Skeptics. Bob doesn't have a story. Eve doesn't have a joke. Barb will teach you to be steady. And Tim left his topic in the last minute again. I'm your host, Brian Gregory. And I'm just going for the awkward pause because we're all incredibly unprepared this week.
I'm not. I'm prepared. I don't have a joke.
Damn thing.
Not a damn thing. This is actually episode 143. It's my fault. It says 142 on the feed. I'm sorry.
Oh, damn you!
I know. So that's my one and only apology for this week, because that's my quota. This is the Virtual Skeptics. Thanks for watching. We're going to do some stuff, and you can watch if you want. I've got people on here, if you haven't noticed, and this is who they are. This is Bob Blaskowitz, CSI's conspiracy guy, web columnist, blogger for Skeptical Humanities, and Skepticality contributor. This is Eve Siebert, editor and blogger at Skeptical Humanities, and contributor to Skepticality and Insight at skeptic.com. This is Barbara Drescher, former psychology instructor, blogger at ICBS Everywhere, and contributor to numerous skeptical projects, including Insight at skeptic.com and The Odds Must Be Crazy. And finally, Tim Farley, blogger at SkepTools and Insight at skeptic.com, Skepticality contributor, creator of What's the Harm, and former JREF fellow. Everyone say hi.
Howdy.
Hi.
Stick your hands in the air like you just don't care. No?
No.
If I didn't care, I wouldn't stick my hands in the air.
Care.
True.
Wow, we've got lots of energy this week. I hope you're ready for a great show. So, if you're watching and you want to get involved in this awesome, fantastic showbiz thing we're doing this week, you can tweet with hashtag Virtual Skeptics. You can comment on the YouTube. Or you can use, let's see, I gotta turn this thing on. Every week, I forget to turn it on until just now. There's a Q&A app on Google Plus Hangouts. If you're watching on the thing, you can submit questions as awkwardly as I'm talking right now. And we will try to answer them on the show.
And everyone
okay.
feel free to wish Blue a happy National Dog Day.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. It's Happy National Dog Day. Happy
Right.
National Dog Day, Blue!
Yeah, he's in the other room. He's asleep.
Yeah. Oh,
Hey.
Blue's letting us down.
Well, he's
Celebrate
tired
early.
because we got him up early this morning because we went out and did a group run with our running club folks at
Wow.
6:30.
Wow.
So he had to get up early to do his morning business.
So he's like been mad at you all day?
Well, he's been napping all day like he always does. He's a dog. What do you expect?
Mine have been barking all day.
That too.
They bark at everything.
Mm-hmm.
So let's do our startup stuff. What's the trivia question this week?
Trivia question is a birthday or anniversary, as you see fit, this Friday. Something well known to U.S. fans of science turns 170 years old. What is it?
Oh. I was going to say I fucking love science, but that's not 170 years old.
No.
Buzz Aldrin?
Also
Close.
not 170
Not
years
quite.
old.
But yeah, if
Pretty
you like
guessing.
science and you live in the United States, you should know of this thing. And it's 170 years old on Friday.
Donald Trump's hair?
That might be 170 years old.
But not even very much interest to science people.
Yeah,
so,
no.
yeah.
No, I think
I
it's
don't
a
know.
great
Maybe forensic science.
people.
Yeah.
Forensic science. Yep.
Cosmetology,
Okay.
that's a science, right?
Cosmetology. It's an ology. It should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ology just means study of, doesn't mean scientific study of.
All right, fine.
Good point. Oh well.
Don't get technical with me.
Yes. The secondary thing we ask every week is I've got two screens behind me, and if you can figure out what's on them, then I will give you my
Oh, I know one of Yay!
One of them should be pretty obvious. The other one
Recognize one of them. It's very
maybe
obvious.
not as obvious.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
yeah.
pretty obvious.
Yeah. So
I mean, I
a couple of
immediately
easy ones,
recognize
hopefully
it.
this week.
I don't
Hopefully
know.
somebody gets. Oh, someone has already started guessing on the Twitter. So if you know them both, get busy, guys, because there's going to be some stiff competition.
I don't know the other one.
And they have a theme.
They have a
Ooh.
theme.
Of course they
have
do.
a theme.
Okay,
Of
so
course
that
they-
should give me a clue to what the other
Yeah.
one is.
Yeah, but you're on the show. You're not supposed to guess. But you are first, so you can if you want. Yeah. So
I have
you-
just
you-
as much chance as anybody else.
yeah,
And no
that's
more.
true. I would appreciate anyone trying if you're on the show or not. So, Barbara, it looks like you're up first this week.
Am I up first? Okay.
That's what the list says, and I
Wow.
always go by the list.
Okay. Well, something came up a couple weeks ago, and I thought it was a good topic to talk about because we've been talking. I've been talking about it, and lots of people have been talking about it. Actually, I wrote a post a few months ago about the psychology of vaccine denial, and the post was mostly to criticize someone for writing about it, but the research that they were talking about was actually very interesting. We've talked a lot in recent years about how the best approach to get people to vaccinate their kids, and that's a different question, I think, from the question of what's the best approach to convince people that vaccines are safe and effective, relatively. And I think the first question is more important than the second question. However, being skeptics, I think in this community at least, most people tend to think, well, if you just convince people, then then they'll do it. Or if you just give people the facts, then they'll believe it, which of course is rubbish. It just doesn't work that way. People don't work that way. So I think that the real question here is how do we get people to vaccinate, because that's a public safety issue, and it's one that we should be very concerned about, and it's more important than convincing them that vaccines are safe and effective. Yes, if we convince them they're safe and effective, they're more likely to vaccinate, but sometimes doing the second actually will convince people to do the first, and that's what my first post was really about. All this research showing that backfire. For example, giving people information about, say, the link between vaccines and autism, that it's bogus, that it doesn't exist, actually does reduce the belief that vaccines cause autism. But one of the things that this piece of research showed is that it actually makes people less likely to vaccinate, because what happens is it then increases their belief that vaccines cause risky, or the risk of side effects is greater. So, and it sounds counterintuitive, but it makes total sense given the vast amount of knowledge that we have about cognitive dissonance. So people are married to their attitudes. They're committed to their attitudes. They're not necessarily committed to their stated reasons for those attitudes, as much as they are committed to the attitudes. And one of the things that we've discovered is that when attitudes and behavior are in conflict, say you do something and you have an attitude that maybe contradicts what you actually do, it's easier to change the attitude than it is to change the behavior. So if we can force people, my point was that if we can force people to vaccinate by creating laws that say you can't send your child to public school, people are going to be more likely to change their attitudes about vaccines because they're forced to vaccinate their kids. That one of those pieces of research that I was talking about actually contradicts. Somebody sent me a link to another piece of research that seems to contradict that. So in one of the pieces of research, it said, or the conclusions, the findings were that while and narrative about a child who had measles actually increased beliefs in serious vaccine side effects. So that was that.
Wait, what was that? I think you dropped out.
Yeah.
Maybe
Sorry.
It was just me.
The important part, one of the important findings, or the relative findings of that piece of, one of the pieces of research I was talking about, is that showing people images of children who have MMR, you know what, that's actually a quote from the piece. I think it's they have measles or mumps or rubella, and a narrative about a child who had measles actually increased beliefs in serious vaccine side effects. Okay?
Lord.
Yeah. So that was one of the findings.
Brains. God.
So then someone actually sent me a link a couple of weeks ago to a piece that was published at the beginning of the month. And the authors of that study found that highlighting factual information about the dangers of communicable diseases, such as, and when I read the study, they did include things like narratives and images, can positively impact people's attitudes to vaccination. So these are two different pieces of research that have findings that pretty much contradict each other. So what happens when you see these two pieces of research? I mean, what are you supposed to think about? And I thought this was a really good topic to talk about on the show, because we run into this sort of thing all the time, especially in social sciences. And we can talk about how one piece of research shouldn't be something that we base policy on, or you know, things like that, because in social sciences things are very complex. This is a good example as to why we don't do that. Why it really bothers me when research, as it is today, is promoted so much in mainstream media, because especially in the social sciences, one study doesn't tell us crap. It almost never does. Sometimes if it's very, very well designed, it will. These studies do tell us something, but it's nothing that we should be taking as truth. And this is a good example as why. Now, there's a few things that are different about these two studies that we should talk about. And usually when studies conflict, one thing I should note too is they were published about the same time. The newer study was submitted for review about a month before the other study was actually published. So it didn't even include those findings in their discussion of literature so far. Usually there's a few months lag time in there. But the first thing that usually comes to mind when I see conflicts is that one study, the quality is probably very different than the other study. Or that there's some complexity in there in one study that you don't see in another study. Because when you oversimplify things, sometimes you can actually get opposite findings because you're doing something completely that's actually very, very different than what the other person did or the other study did. So I looked at both studies. And for one thing, I would say that both of these studies are fairly well designed. The researchers are competent. You know, in the second study, the last author is Holyoke, who's, you know, very well known, very well respected. These are not incompetent researchers just because they find something different. But I did find some differences in the research that I think are interesting. For one thing, the first study that I talked about, the first thing that I looked at was sample, and how they were sampled and what the sample size was. The second study, which was the lead author is Horn, sampled 315 men and women. Nyan, who's the first author in the first study, their final sample was 1,759 parents with children under the age of 18. So in most research, 315 is actually a really big sample. It's pretty good. These studies were both done online, so when you do things online, the scale tends to be much bigger, and that's good because you need a bigger scale, because you need bigger samples because there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of variation, people are paying attention at different rates, things like that. And they do go through attention checks to make sure that people are actually completing the study. So there's a lot of work that goes into making sure that the answers are good, but you still get a lot of noise in there because people really aren't answering as conscientiously as they would if they were sitting at a table with a researcher sitting in front of them and writing it down on a piece of paper. But there's a big difference between 315 and 1759. Normally, bigger isn't necessarily better. But when you're talking about stuff that's very complex, and when you're trying to compare two different studies, the sample size should be something that you look at, and it should be something that you consider. The reason that bigger isn't necessarily always better is because quite often if you have larger samples, you find things that may be statistically significant, but they're not really practically significant. So that's not really the question here. The question here is, we've got conflicting findings, which one should we believe? Well, the larger sample's probably going to be, that's a pro on that side. Another pro on that side is they looked at parents with children over the age of 18, or under the age of 18, rather. Now, the second study, the smaller study, they did do checks to make sure that the parents and the non-parents didn't differ significantly in their answers. But there's still noise. These are still different groups. And frankly, I don't really care what non-parents think about vaccination. It's not really of interest. I don't think that, I think that if you have the opportunity, you cut them out of your study because they're not the relevant group. They're not the group of interest here. So the more specific you get, the less you can generalize to people. But I don't need to generalize to people who aren't parents. I need to generalize to people who are parents because those are the ones that have to make the decision about whether to vaccinate their child or not. Okay.
Right. Okay.
So that's my issue with that. But there are some other differences in the study between the studies that I think are more important. For one thing, the output measures are different. The second study, the one that's smaller, is oversimplified. Okay, in the Nyan study, they had 3 outcome measures, each addressing a very specific attitude. The 3 outcome measures were the belief that vaccines cause autism, the perceived risk of side effects from vaccines, and the intent to vaccinate one's child or children. So by contrast, what the Horn study did is they had one measure where they combined answers to 5 very specific questions. The questions were things like, I intend to vaccinate my child, doctors would not recommend vaccines if they were unsafe, etc. And those are very specific questions that when you put them all together, you lose all the variability between them. And while the answers to those for any given person might be highly correlated, the effects of any intervention that you give or any education that you give and those sorts of things might be very different on the answers to those questions. And I think the Nyan study actually shows that because there were different questions. For example, they had the measure of belief that vaccines cause autism, and they were able to reduce that with education, but then a different measure actually went up, the measure of risk of side effects from that same intervention. So it's important to look at these things separately, and yet the Horn study lumped them all together into one vague measure they call attitude toward vaccines. That's not a very specific, that's not a very interesting measure. It's not a very interesting outcome. I'm not sure I care what their attitude toward vaccines is. I care what their attitude toward vaccinating their child is. Okay? I may care that they don't think that autism is related to vaccines, but I'm more interested in each one separately. And because the treatments affect these questions differently, you really need to separate those out and look at them differently. Unfortunately, when you do that, guess what you need? A larger sample size. The more things you measure, the more people you need to ask, because the more statistical tests you're running and the more chance you have of making what we call a type 1 or type 2 error. Okay, so
Mhm.
you need to have a larger sample, and they did not have a very large sample. So to keep it, clean, yes, you can find these things with this vague outcome measure, but is that vague outcome measure really answering the question? And the question is whether or not these interventions are effective. They don't really define what effective means, though. Does effective mean you vaccinate your child, or does it mean that you learn that vaccines don't cause autism? So that's another interesting question. And then there was one final thing that they did differently that I thought was really important too, and that is the timing of the research. When you do anything about attitude change, you first want to poll the attitude. So you need to find out how people, what people think. So for example, one of the things that's about the first study that I talked about the Ryan study, is that the effects are really only on the people who had the lowest regard of vaccines. So the ones who had the strongest beliefs that vaccines were harmful and so forth. So you need to find out what people think before they're given the treatment. And then you measure it again afterwards. So you have a before and after. But as soon as you ask somebody about their attitudes, they're now thinking about their attitudes, and that affects how they receive information about those attitudes, which then changes how that affects what they say afterward. And this is important because in real-world applications, you don't poll people before you give them information. We don't walk around, trying to educate people with vaccines by first asking them. At least that's not what you should do. You should give them
I try to pick fights on Facebook.
Yeah, well, maybe with individuals,
we know,
okay? But if you're
embarrassing.
trying to, the ads that they show on TV urging people to vaccinate their child, don't poll the audience first what their attitudes are, and then they just promote vaccines. And that's really the best approach. But the problem is you can't do that in a study. You can't poll people ahead of time and then get a good idea of how this is going to affect people in real life if you immediately give them a treatment and then pull them afterwards. So you want some time to go by. And the Ryan study, am I saying that right? Make sure I'm saying that right.
We wouldn't know.
Yeah, I think it's Ryan. It's Nyahan. They had about 2
Like a
weeks.
cat?
I guess. It was about 2 weeks between the time that they did the initial screening and the time they gave the treatment. The Horn study had the treatment the day after. So they did the initial screening, and then the day after they gave the treatment, the interventions, and then they pulled the attitude. So that's actually pretty important. So I think, in conclusion, if I have to choose between these two findings, I'm going to stick with the first one, and the first one is that these interventions of, showing people sick children and giving them anecdotes don't necessarily increase the probability that people are going to vaccinate their children. I think that what we really need to do is to force people to vaccinate their children, and then they'll start changing their attitudes, because once you've done it, it's really hard to justify having done it with the belief that it would have harmed your child.
The buyer's remorse.
Yes, it's sort of like, I don't want to give a really morbid example, but there are lots of examples. I'll give a different one. Okay, how about the conservative parent who thinks that they would disown their child if they ever dated somebody of a different race? Sometimes they do, and then sometimes when it actually happens, it's a totally different story.
Yeah.
They don't want to. Yeah, they don't want to disown their child. They don't want to do that. So guess what happens?
So then they start celebrating Kwanzaa, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And I've seen that happen. You don't reject your own grandchild, once it happens, but they might say that they would ahead of time because that's the attitude.
It's always easier to profess an ideal than to live up to it. So
It is. It is. And so I honestly believe that if we pass these laws, I'm okay with religious exemption to an extent, but actually, no, I'm not. Those people can go to a religious school. When it comes to public schools, I don't think there should be any exemptions, and I think that if we get rid of the exemptions, we're going to find a much higher vaccination rate because people don't want to go through the trouble or pay the money to send their kids to private schools or homeschool them. It's a huge thing, and I think in the end, their attitudes about the dangers of vaccines will change because they'll have to, because they have to accept that what they're doing isn't so harmful. They'll have to believe it. So that's pretty much my thing. I think it's very interesting. What do you do, especially as a layperson? What do you do when things don't add up? When you've got research that is conflicting. Most people just pick the one that agrees with what they believe, rather than actually looking at the research and trying to decide, what the quality of the research is, or they'll just look for something that's wrong with the research they disagree with. These are both well-designed studies, but one is much more specific than the other. One is much more clean in terms of defining the terms. The terms are much better defined, and it was more work, but the findings are more interesting. And the first one, I would say, would have been great on its own. It would have given us ideas for then studying. The first one could have been a pilot for the second one very easily. A pilot research is an initial piece of research that you then follow up and you say, okay, under what conditions does this happen? Under those vague conditions, it happens. When you get more specific, you see that there are actually interactions going on here that maybe are more interesting and more important.
My takeaway from this is baffling as far as in psychology, how do you get a body of evidence for anything? Because
it's hard.
Because different studies with different protocols, with different subtleties in the way that they structure the questions, it's the same problem. You're always comparing that things that may not be apples and apples. They may be something different, and how do you group them together in any kind of meaningful knowledge and develop for other sciences where you're measuring a certain phenomena, you can actually group studies together, even in medicine, which
you can
is
in
statistical
social
and
sciences too.
Yeah,
you can. You don't get the same thing every time like you do in physics, but I mean you're not what you can do is you can see what's consistent and what isn't consistent. And then you take what's consistent and you start picking it apart and you say, okay, it's consistent until you do this. And then you find the explanation for why it's different. And that's usually another study. So you just keep doing studies and you pick it apart, and people will spend an entire lifetime picking apart one question, because some things are very simple and some things are very complex. Most of it's complex, but you can pick apart something for a whole lifetime. And actually, I mean, you look at Kahneman or even Loftus, and you can see that under some circumstances this happens, under some circumstances that happens, and sometimes some things are consistent no matter what,
But usually, isn't it usually just one definitive study that makes the point, and then maybe a bunch of supporting ones that are actually studying something different that's related? I mean, how do you get the statistical benefit of having a lot of repetition, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, you have the repetition, but you usually have it with differences. I mean, sometimes things are just replicated. You get something like Milgram's study, it was replicated, and yes, some of the conditions were changed, but the findings, some of the findings hold up and some don't. And that's where you say, okay, well, it happens. It holds up under this condition but not that condition. So it's sort of like playing mastermind. You know,
Just narrow it down.
it's a
over
lot
time.
like that. And almost everything in psychology is converging evidence. It's converging. It's not
Okay.
diverging, it's converging. Your ideas diverge, but the evidence converges. And you pull it in
And you know
from
by the
different
yeah.
places.
Okay. Eve's gonna ask something.
Well, I was going to say, and this isn't even just in psychology, but when there are contradictory studies, and that can happen even in the hard sciences, like in medicine, the ones that get reported in the press, like coffee cures
Oh yeah.
cancer,
Yeah.
coffee causes cancer, or whatever.
When we all know that
Usually
well,
that's because it's a one-off study,
I
though.
would say medicine's not necessarily a hard science either. It's a life science.
No,
It's
Well,
complex.
It's
what
it's statistical. Yeah.
in any field, let's just say, when there are contradictory studies, some people say, well, read this study. The thing is, for a layperson, sometimes, well, first of all, sometimes the study is inaccessible for lay people. Secondly, then if you have access to it, if it's not your field, sometimes you might as well read Martian.
Yeah.
That it is just incomprehensible, and you just don't have the knowledge base to judge.
And that's a problem in psychology. And by the way, the second piece that I was talking about is behind a paywall. So, I had to buy it to see it. But it's a particular problem in psychology, for me anyway. My perception is that most people think that they understand every psychology study. Well, not every study. There's some bizarre stuff out there. But most things like this, I think that people read them and believe that they just get it and they can talk about it. And the truth is, you can't. If you don't really understand or you don't have the body of knowledge to put it into context, like the first study that I was talking about, if you don't really understand cognitive dissonance, then these findings don't make any sense to you. Why on earth would people respond that way? You've now taught them something, they should have learned from it, and but if you don't know cognitive dissonance theory, you wouldn't understand it. It wouldn't even occur to you. And if it's not ingrained in you because it's your field, even if you do know about it, it may not even occur to you that that's what's going on. So
Well,
I
Dr.
have a lot of,
Barbara, it sounds to me like you're just being elitist and calling me stupid.
yeah, maybe. I'm just saying.
It just sounds like you're not
saying is
open-minded, Barb.
open access to journals is a double-edged sword. It is a double-edged sword because, yes, we should all be able to quote. We should all be able to cite original sources. But the truth is, if you're not an expert in the field, maybe you shouldn't be citing original sources. Maybe you should be citing something that's been digested and spit out and is, a third-party source. Yeah. Let the experts talk about it, and quote them and not necessarily original research.
I can read the internet.
Yeah. And it's not always going to be right.
Too. Because then when it's been digested, sometimes, well, in a sense, it's essentially always interpreted, because if you're summarizing, you're deciding what's important and what's not, even if it's a good summary. Yeah. So it's always difficult. I mean, when we teach research or church research, that's always difficult because we're sort of trained to tell them, look at scholarly sources. But crap, in almost any field, at least some scholarly sources are just and they can be well written and lovely and everything, but there's such a large body of knowledge, and this is true even in the humanities, large body of knowledge behind them that they're very hard for, say, for instance, college freshmen or even someone well beyond that to understand sometimes.
And sometimes they think they do anyway. That's because it makes sense to them. And something might make sense, and it doesn't mean that you have a deep understanding of it. It's sort of like, when I used to tell my students, they'd answer something on a test, because I never did multiple choice tests, so we're always short answer or essay. And they'd write, and they thought they had this great handle on the information, but then they couldn't write about it. And my point is that they're sitting there in class listening to me.
So you had engineers as students?
What? I'm sorry, what?
So you had engineers as students?
Yeah. No, they're sitting there in class listening to what I'm saying, and what I'm saying makes sense to them, and they understand it. That doesn't mean that you have a deep enough understanding of it that you can then answer a question about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
the way to study.
You might have a factual knowledge, but not
Right.
a working understanding.
Right. And if I'm sitting there, talking about it, and you get it, that doesn't mean you can then turn around and answer a question about it on a test. Just because I'm making sense to you does not mean that you know the material. You have to know the material if you want to answer the questions on a test.
Yep.
So you can't just read. It's like the difference between passive reading and active reading, or answering, questions. And that takes time. It takes time, and it takes study. And to think that you can just, grab a piece of research, and just because you understand what it says doesn't mean you can interpret it in the context of the field and spit it out and tell other people what it means or what it should predict. It doesn't mean you can do that.
Wow, Barbara, you're on fire.
Sorry, it's a pet peeve of mine.
Yes, and that was a very, very.
And I'm
interesting
reminded
discussion.
about it because the first study that I was talking about was, I wrote about it because somebody had done that. They had taken a couple of pieces of research and thought that they understood it, and started yapping about their personal opinion about it, and didn't know what the hell they were talking about. So, anyway.
Stupid, non-elite people. No, I'm kidding. Thanks, Barbara. I'm sorry. That discussion was awesome. We were really enjoying it. I was enjoying it, but I got to move on.
Okay.
And move on to Bob, which I don't even know what Bob is doing. Which
Right. Yeah.
I'm hoping it's good enough for
Bob
me to have interrupted Barbara.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, could you bring up my slide?
I'm afraid.
Be very afraid.
All right. See that right there?
It's a plastic boot.
Okay. So,
it's
I know what that is.
Hold on. This is another episode of Bob had to look up. What the hell is that? I don't know what I'm going to call
this.
this.
You had to look that up? Really?
Hold on.
Old.
Huh?
It's a melted Jolly Rancher.
No, it's not. Okay, so I had to look that up, and apparently no one else in the world did, except possibly Brian.
I know what it is. I'm just making stuff up.
Okay, so this is I saw this. What the hell? Okay, so figure it out, people. I'll give you the answer.
So
that was
the extent
that
of
was
what you're...
worth interrupting Barb.
Okay.
What the hell is that?
We have a third quiz this week.
We do.
A trivia question and the videos, which here has some video time right there. We need to figure out what the heck is that.
I can give you. It's about the size of a jar of peanut butter.
It's a jar of peanut butter.
A small jar.
It's a small jar of peanut butter.
Oh, I don't know. Small.
Okay then.
Now he's defending the size of his jar of peanut butter.
We're gonna go to and on that note, while you guys are figuring out what the heck that blue thing is, it's alien goo. I don't know. Tim's got something to talk about, which.
Oh, I do?
Yeah, which he prepared for longer than Bob did.
This took weeks and weeks of thinking about this.
Yeah, well, I have
Put the blue thing down.
I should have thrown a few of them into the slides, which shows how unprepared I was today. I'm sorry, it's busy at work.
Yeah, we're all pretty busy today. So.
But there are more photos from my wedding a couple weeks ago if you go to AllisonMahPhotography.com, 2 L's, MAH, photography.com, AllisonMahPhotography.com. And look on our blog. The top post on our blog is photos from our wedding. You can see a very nice picture of Blue, a couple of nice pictures of Blue, and pictures of some of the folks in costume. The other thing I wanted to point out was this actually was posted back in July, but somehow I missed it then, and I don't know if we've talked about it on the show. But there was a really good, I thought, really good article by William Salatin at Slate, article about how screwed up all the anti-GMO information out there is. That basically everything it's no surprise to skeptics that there's a lot of crazy anti-GMO stuff out there, and it's exactly like the anti-vax and all the other stuff that you encounter, in that all the arguments that you hear from the other side are nonsense, complete nonsense. And he just goes through, and it's a very link-heavy article where like every other phrase in the article is linked. And he just points out time after time after time that not only is Greenpeace in particular, he focuses on Greenpeace since they tend to lead the anti-GMO charge in a lot of venues, and not only are they just flat out lying, misquoting things out of papers, saying papers say one thing when they actually say the reverse, but also several instances of where Greenpeace said one thing in one context, then got contradicted and said the exact opposite thing in another context. And it's, you read through this thing and it's like, okay, is there any good argument against GMOs? And he actually gets to that at the bottom, what the real, potentially scientific objections are, and it's a great piece of work. He's just collected a lot of really good information, so I highly recommend it. So if you go to Slate and look up GMO lies, that's a great article. I also linked to it on my Twitter and Facebook feed in the last few days, so you can find it there. And that's all I got. Well, one other thing, my schedule is firming up for DragonCon, which is coming up next week, and I just wanted to talk about a couple of the things that I'm going to be talking about at DragonCon. I am doing 2 sessions in the Skep track. One is the wrap-up session, which is not usually a huge deal. The big session that I'm doing in the thing is a panel on skeptical thinking about technology, which should be fun. That's going to have Tom Merritt and Veronica Belmont on it. And then I'm doing 2. That is Sunday at 1 p.m. a week from this Sunday, not this coming. DragonCon is like 10 days away. So there's that. I'm doing 2 sessions over in the EFF track. One is Year of the Data Breach. We're going to talk about all the crazy data breaches that have happened this year, and I guess we'll have to add some stuff about the Ashley Madison thing. And the other one is the session they do every year on Hacking 101. So if you ever wanted to learn about what a hacker does and what hacking is about and how you learn to hack, and whether or not you really should learn to hack, come to that. Often I get some of the other panelists mad because a lot of them like to tell you, oh, just go do what you want to do, and I tell you, don't hack other people's stuff. There's plenty of ways to learn this stuff without actually breaking the law, which rubs people the wrong way for some reason in that particular room. Anyway, and then a new thing for me, I'm going to do a session over on the Kaleidoscope track, which is normally just for kids, but they're doing a session on Friday at 8:30 p.m. that's for adults, called Tough Topics for Parents, and we're going to talk about internet bullying, filtering, how to keep yourself or how to keep your kids basically protected on the internet, or how to prepare them to be on the internet and keep themselves protected. So that'll be 8:30 on Friday. The data breach one is in the morning on Friday, and the Hacking 101 is in the evening on Saturday. So look for that.
How do you protect Blue from encountering bad things on the internet.
Well, he doesn't have thumbs, so...
Makes it easy. Yeah. I mean, you can use a mouse,
Yeah.
but you can't click on anything.
Yep.
So, and it's really slobbery afterwards.
Well, I was thinking you might be able to use a tablet with his nose, but it's going to get damp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He does have
Proper
some
spam.
online accounts. He has a Twitter account that he never posts on anymore.
You know, I have
How does he
My
tweet
stu-
without thumbs?
I have my
Well, he gets
student.
some help.
He's speech to text and then Google Translate from dog. But I actually have my students create accounts for their pets so that they're not actually linked to my students' names for using online services and stuff like that. So.
Nice.
You're encouraging your students to create fake accounts?
Oh, everybody should have fake accounts.
Well, that's allowed on
They
Twitter,
can
though.
Make
Isn't it?
fake
Yeah.
It's against policy.
I think
on
I
Facebook.
will. Yeah, Facebook,
True.
they want you to use your real name so they can market to you.
Yeah. But I thought it was okay on Twitter.
Yeah, I seriously doubt that Gregor Mendel has a Twitter account.
I've lost
Just
track
saying.
of how many freaking Twitter accounts I have.
Apparently, he's watching the show.
Yes, Gregor Mendel is a regular viewer.
It's true.
Okay, moving along. Thanks, Tim. Eve.
Oh, I thought robots were next, but okay.
There are no robots this week. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right.
Robots
Okay.
are off
I
creating
blame-
an apocalypse on some other planet right now.
Yeah.
I blame Yahoo
Okay.
and
Well,
Bob.
sure. Okay, well, we've previously covered. I just want to say the girls were prepared this week. And I'm just pointing it out.
Good
Um,
point.
Yeah.
That's very
we
sexist. to point
previously-
that out.
Covered the saga of the so-called the Gospel of Jesus' wife, Papyrus. And in fact, I actually went through to find the previous shows on it, and so there are links to those in the show notes, and you can watch my hair gradually get shorter.
Someone needs to make that happen.
Anyway, almost 3 years ago now, Karen King, Hollis Professor of Divinity at Harvard Divinity School, presented a paper at the International Conference of Coptic Studies in Rome. She discussed a tiny fragment of papyrus, and we do have a picture of that yet again,
Yay!
which is about the size of a business
More than
card.
every other slide.
Yeah. And it contains the phrase in Sahidic Coptic, Jesus said to them, my wife. It also says that Jesus said something about a woman who was able to be his disciple, and there's also a reference to his mother who gave him life. The Harvard Theological Review was supposed to publish King's article in its January 2013 issue, but there was immediate controversy. Questions were raised about the fragment's authenticity by the Coptic scholars at the conference, and even 2 of the 3 readers for the Harvard Theological Review who read the article had raised questions about authenticity. The papyrus had no provenance, just an owner who wanted to remain anonymous. The Coptic was apparently full of mistakes. It had been cobbled together from a printed edition of a Coptic Gospel of St. Thomas, which is available online. So all of it, everything on the little fragment was somewhere in the Gospel of St. Thomas, the Coptic Gospel of St. Thomas, except for the phrase, my wife, which is the one that everyone got excited about. That apparently was
Did we
added.
use the joke? It said, Jesus said, take my wife?
Yes,
Yeah.
we did. There's also quite a lot of amusement over Coptic linguists. There's even included a typo. A lot
Eve,
of questions
Eve.
were raised. Yeah.
Eve,
Mhm.
you blanked out there for a minute.
Oh dear.
After
Yeah.
Coptic linguist.
Later.
So, well, okay. The papyrus even apparently included a typo from the printed edition. So the Harvard Theological Review delayed publication until over a year later. At that time, they published a special edition dedicated to the papyrus. So they had King's article, reports on the scientific testing, and an article questioning the authenticity. Many mainstream headlines declared that the fragment was authentic because science. The carbon dating at the universities of Arizona and Harvard had a baffling spread of dates, from 405 BCE to 741 CE. And, 405 BCE was, just to point out the obvious, before Jesus was born, assuming he existed.
So it was a prophecy?
He was probably not saying, here's my wife. Arizona admitted their very early dates were unreliable. Regardless, a modern forger could use old papyrus, and everyone's always acknowledged that. So the ink analysis was really important, and it showed, according to a team at Columbia, that it was consistent with an early date, or at least there was nothing inconsistent with an early date. So that doesn't eliminate authenticity, but it doesn't prove it either. However, it was pointed out the ink was faded, illegible in places, and it was present in the frayed edges of the fragment, suggesting, that it had gone on. So it wasn't just written to fit that tiny bit of papyrus. And one of the MIT chemists said in interviews that it would be difficult, if not impossible, to forge the document. But he's not an expert on forgery or Coptic manuscripts, so it could be a very good physical forgery. There are very good forgeries. Because the problems with the text remained. The Harvard Theological Review also printed a vigorous rebuttal by Brown University Egyptologist Leo Dupuit, who invoked Monty Python to emphasize what he considered the farcical nature of just how bad a forgery
I like this guy.
The text was. Yeah. He also, in emails to journalists. Yeah. In an email to journalists, used the wonderful phrase "Keystone Coptic."
Yeah.
Nice.
Which is awesome. And that was after another fragment owned by the same anonymous owner became available to scholars, because it was also sent for carbon testing and I guess ink analysis as a comparison. And this was a version of the canonical Gospel of John, a Coptic version, and it also had issues. It also seemed to be based on a printed text. But these arguments are based on textual and linguistic studies of ancient texts in a dead language, and a fairly obscure dead language. We're not talking Latin here. They're hard to understand. Some of them have to do with grammar. Dupuit has said, it doesn't look like it was written by anyone who is literate in Coptic, who actually understood Coptic. But those arguments are kind of, the detailed arguments are harder to understand than science says it's authentic. And it seems fuzzier to people. But from what I've seen, and it's not my field, they seem like really strong arguments. And, of course, the lack of provenance remained a problem. However, also in 2014, a little bit later, some bits of information began appearing. More recently, also, Columbia University is running apparently new tests on the ink. They haven't published that yet, but according to Owen Jarris of Live Science, they've said that one of their findings could provide support for authenticity, but that's still very much up in the air right now. We have no details. Meanwhile, King last year provided a photocopy of a contract from the anonymous owner, who's still anonymous, and it reputedly shows that the current owner, bought the fragment and 5 other Coptic fragments from a man named Hans Ulrich Laukamp in 1999, and that Laukamp had acquired the fragment in 1963 in Potsdam, East Germany. So that would seem to take it back, the provenance back to 1963. However, Life Science found that Laukamp, though based in Germany, was the owner of ACMB, American Corporation for Milling and Boar Works, in Venice, Florida. Laukamp is dead. His wife is dead. They seem to have no living descendants or relatives. But at the time of Laukamp's death, a man named Rene Ernest was the representative of his estate. And according to Life Science, quote, in an exchange of emails in German, Ernest said that Laukamp did not collect antiquities, did not own this papyrus, and in fact was living in West Berlin in 1963, so he couldn't have crossed the Berlin Wall into Potsdam. Laukamp, he said, was a toolmaker and had no interest in old things. In fact, Ernest was astonished to hear that Laukamp's name had been linked to this papyrus. So there's that. Axel Hertzsprung, another co-owner of the toolmaking company, also said that as far as he knew, Laukamp didn't collect antiquities and didn't own any papyrus. King also mentioned that the owner gave her a 1982 letter addressed to Laukamp from Peter Monroe, a professor at Freie University in Berlin. In the letter, Monroe mentions that a colleague, Professor Fecht, probably Gerhard Fecht, an Egyptologist at Freie University, had identified one of Laukamp's papyrus fragments as containing text from the Gospel of St. John. Monroe and Fecht, like Laukamp, are dead. However, so really, there's a whole bunch of stuff that it's very hard, that looks like provenance, that seems to have come up at a rather convenient time, when people are saying there's no provenance, and can't very easily be verified because everyone's dead. However, Life Science found 7 Laukamp signatures on 5 notarized documents signed between 1997 and 2001. So right from the correct time period, and they're notarized, so they're genuine. And that means that forensic handwriting experts could compare the genuine signatures to the signature on the contract if the people involved agree to it. That hasn't happened yet. King and the Harvard Divinity School have not responded to Life Science, last I heard. If the signature is genuine, it still doesn't prove that the fragment is genuine, but it adds plausibility to the story that it's not, that it wasn't made in 2011. If the signature is a forgery, it also doesn't prove that the fragment is a forgery, but it certainly doesn't help with the argument for its authenticity. So basically, quick, someone called Joe Nickel.
There you go.
Page him on his hotline. Oh wait, he doesn't use technology.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Someone send him a pigeon.
Send him a telegram.
Send him a pigeon.
Does he have a plain old telephone?
Yes.
I think so.
Yeah.
I believe so.
Okay, so you can call him with a pigeon.
Yes.
He has a Twitter account.
I don't think
actually
he
use
knows that exists.
Yeah, I don't think it's
Stepped
probably,
within 500 yards of it.
yeah.
This is frustrating.
What's frustrating? Technology?
The
Yes.
fragment.
Technology is.
Yeah.
It never ends,
Yeah. Yeah.
It has to be a pretty phenomenal forgery, except for the fact that it's Keystone Coptic.
That's what?
Keystone Coptic.
Yeah. Yeah. It's everything about physically seems to be, well, although also the handwriting's not supposed to be right, but physically everything looks good. Textually and linguistically, everything looks wrong. It does seem to be a case where it's just too good to be true, because it's in that tiny fragment. It hits so many things that we're going to get into headlines because of the Da Vinci Code, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, Holy crap. But also a more serious interest to scholars interested in, feminist biblical scholars interested in the importance of women, particularly Mary Magdalene, in early Christianity, which is a valid area to look at, and also just the wide variety of different views among early Christians, which a lot of people aren't aware of.
Yeah,
so it's hitting on all those things so perfectly.
I can't help but think this is just some weird word search.
Yeah, could be.
I mean, I can see a couple of words in there. There's wall,
a jumble,
and yeah, it's a word search. That's the official word name of a jumble. It's called a word search. Right? Or is it jumble something else?
No.
So it's a snip
Jumble
from
is
a
a
very
jumble.
old newspaper.
Yeah.
Yes, and if you had the whole thing, right next to it, you'd have the comic of Snoopy and his, I don't know.
And the world's oldest astrology column.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Capricornius. I don't know. Okay, I think we're out of time. But let's do the wrap-up. Thanks, Eve. That was interesting, and that's like the longest-running story on our show, really.
It was episode
Keeps on
7.
giving.
Was
The
the
greatest
first time it
story
came
ever
up.
told.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do our wrap-up stuff. Announcements. Everybody grab your books. No, I gotta do trivia first. Trivia. Did anybody get trivia? Actually, someone got it really early. But before you give that person credit, I just wanted to point out a couple of the wrong answers because I thought it would be funny. Craig Sachs threw a couple of guesses in the Q&A. I'm assuming these are guesses for the trivia. Now, the trivia question was, what thing well known to U.S. fans of science turns 170 years old on this Friday? Now, 170 years ago was what year, Tim?
1845.
1845. Now, what year was the moon landing?
1969.
Okay, so a full 100-some years after 1845. Okay, so
Oh,
Craig
that's what
Sachs,
they want you to think.
yes, Craig Sachs claimed the moon hoax could be 170 years old, and that made me giggle. The other thing he guessed was the Goddard rocket, which is pretty darn old. It was the 1926, I think.
Yeah, it's the 20s.
But not 170 years old.
Well, I think in Moon Hoax he might be referring to the New York Sun. There was a hoax set of news articles in 1835 where they claimed that an astronomer had observed people or creatures on the moon and got people going about that. So I'll give Craig the benefit of the doubt and think that that's what he was talking about.
They were guessing. So yeah,
yeah.
Okay, I mean, I didn't know about that one.
But the actual, and I just noticed that if you happen to follow Michael Shermer on Twitter, he happens to have, I'm sure he's not watching this, happens to have tweeted the answer completely coincidentally 3 minutes ago.
The odds must be crazy.
Yeah, there's an odds must be crazy right there. It's Scientific American magazine, was first published on August 28th, 1845, so Friday is its 170th birthday. And he just tweeted a picture of a birthday cake that has the issue printed on the top.
Who actually did get credit for this?
Oh, Howard.
Yeah. Skep Review on Twitter.
Skeptical review. Yep.
And I think he tweeted it as you were still asking the question, which was kind
Oh,
of
did he? Well, good job, Howard.
Yay! And I got one guess on the videos.
One?
Well,
Really?
Yeah, I actually got a guess. That's surprising. I got any guesses, but I'm gonna have to find this. I saw it when it came out. It was actually before I asked what they were. It was earlier in the show. I think it's Mark Price, and I think he got the Buckaroo Banzai video, which is the one with the bow tie. It just came up, which that was pretty darn obvious.
Yeah.
The other one is the trailer for Independence Day, and the theme is sci-fi movies with Jeff Goldblum.
With Jeff Goldblum. Okay. I was hoping it was a Peter Weller, but...
No, that would have been RoboCop.
Yeah.
But, no.
I thought it was
Well,
I thought it was RoboCop dressed as Doctor Who.
This is earlier than this is the bow tie that was the cool bow tie before the cool bow tie.
Yes.
If you say so.
Yes.
If you have not seen Buckaroo Banzai in the Eighth Dimension, you should.
Yes, it is
Great
a
movie.
classic 80s movie. And my kids haven't seen it yet, but it's on deck for this coming weekend. Because I keep talking about it because it's for some reason it's in my head. And yeah, there. Bob.
Yes. Almost instantly, Nathan got it. That joke.
Yeah, pretty much everyone on the planet knows what this thing is.
Really?
Yeah.
We all have them in our. We've all had them in our house growing up.
Yeah.
Yep.
You had them in your house growing up?
Yeah, my parents used them as paperweights.
There were a lot of people who would use them as paperweights or collect them.
Yeah, I had a friend.
When
I was in grammar school, collected different shapes of them because there's lots of different.
Right. Okay.
Shapes
So
and sizes.
there's apparently a whole, and I didn't realize this, that there's a whole subculture of collection, of collectors who gather old insulators from telegraph wires.
Yep.
So it's a 19th century telegraph wire insulator. Hooray!
And tons of them were made. Yeah.
But if you go to the image here. Yeah, look at this.
There you go.
There's a guy, like down the road from us, basically, right near campus, who has 10,000 of these, and he puts them all on display in his yard. And
Nice.
so you drive down the road, and there's
the fence has them too.
The fence has
they're all
them,
over the place.
and he has the tops of these telephone poles, and it's just you drive. What the hell is that? And so that was.
Do they have Christmas lights in them? Because that would be cool too.
That would be
That would be cool. Put little lights in each one.
But
They're very
you
distracting.
should mention it to them.
Eve.
I was going to say it's very distracting when you should be keeping your eyes on the road looking for geese, because
There are also geese around here.
Yes.
resin flocks of geese.
But these used to be ubiquitous, and now you don't see them very much anymore. You certainly don't see clusters of 10,000 of them. So just roundabout. He apparently the guy who collected them died several years ago. I don't know about if his wife is still alive. He was a World War II era vet, and I believe a retired postman. And it always seems like they're retired mailmen, doesn't it?
Did he happen to own Coptic papyrus?
No, not that I know.
Just-
But yeah, so 10,000 of these things are right by my house, and I hadn't. You look at it and you think it looks like that could be at the top of a telephone pole or something. Yeah, but
Well,
yes,
that is definitely Keystone Coptic.
Zing.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Bob.
Uh-huh.
I
learned a thing.
Can I do the announcements now?
Okay.
Sure.
Yes.
Oh, all right. If you force me to. Couple announcements this week. Eve has a new post up on Insight at skeptic.com about her last week's topic, Shakespeare's alleged drug use. and that should be interesting and in detail. And Tim already mentioned this, but Tim and Barbara are going to be speaking at DragonCon in a week. Well, in 10 days ish. Well, no, I guess it's a week.
9
Pretty
days.
close.
Yeah, it's close.
Tomorrow is Thursday. It would be a
We
week.
leave on Thursday, so we leave
Week from
from
Friday.
And Tim's also appearing on the Electronic Frontiers Forum and Kaleidoscope tracks. You want to make Kaleidoscopes?
That's the name of the
Kids
kids
track.
track.
I know.
I'm only doing Skeptrack this year.
Yeah.
But my
Okay,
kids
then.
will be doing Skeptrack too.
Oh
Really?
yeah, that's right. I
Cool.
saw that in the schedule. Her kids are going
We've
to be
got
on one of the
14. Angie and I and our kids will be on a panel with Soupy, talking about what
Cool.
it's like to be a skeptical teenager.
panels. Yeah, that should be fun.
Interesting. That should be fun. And I'm not going to be there, so I am going to be just sad.
Oh.
Yeah, us too.
Oh.
So, on that note, I'm going to force you all to read from books.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Tim. Since you said okay.
Allow me to set the record straight. First off, Wikipedia is an online encyclopedia that is trying to be the repository of all knowledge. It is not Tumblr or Reddit or some other social network. Wikipedia has rules. Some of them are open to interpretation a bit, but for the most part the rules are discussed within the community of editors and usually enforced evenly. There is no they on Wikipedia, only we. There are a few admins and senior editors who usually have the last word on an issue, but more often rules are enforced by consensus. The idea of a conspiracy of people who edit with an agenda, pro-skeptic or otherwise, is just unwarranted.
Who's next?
War and Peace.
Eve.
On 28 January 1976, the Reverend Arthur J. Marin, a striking figure with an Old Testament beard, arrived in Clearwater from Los Angeles to announce at a news conference that the Church of Scientology were the owners of the Fort Harrison Hotel and the Bank of Clearwater building. Its involvement had not previously been revealed, only out of an altruistic desire to avoid overshadowing the work of its subsidiary organization, United Churches. On 5 February, 500 citizens attended an open day at the Fort Harrison Hotel to view the renovation work that had already been completed. Marin reassured those present that there was nothing to fear from Scientology. Scientologists are people who don't drink or violate laws, he said. They're friendly and want to contribute. Next day, the Church of Scientology filed a $1 million lawsuit against Mayor Gabriel Cazares, accusing him of libel, slander, and violation of the church's civil rights.
Yep.
Yeah.
The Church of Irony, I guess.
Yes.
You
Barbara.
I'm pretty much fucked. That's my considered opinion. Fucked. 6 days into what should be the greatest 2 months of my life turned into a nightmare. I don't even know who
will read this. I guess someone will find it eventually. Maybe 100 years from now.
Did we pick the same book? And the same passage?
No, we didn't pick the same passage.
Okay, well, I'll stop reading. You can read yours now.
Okay, the passage I'm reading makes me think that this book is a lot like the Turner Diaries, which is, that's fighting words for some people. Almost everyone, because the Turner Diaries is racist shit. But hold on. Hermes is powered by ion engines. They throw argon out the back of the ship really fast to get a tiny amount of acceleration. The thing is, it doesn't take much reactant mass, so a little argon and a nuclear reactor to power things let us accelerate constantly the whole way there. You'd be amazed at how fast you can get going with a tiny acceleration over a long time. And yeah. It's apparently the only book that skeptics are reading these days.
Apparently.
Everybody's reading it.
Yes. And it's good that you're reading it, Bob.
I know.
For some reason, I always knew I wanted to be an actor. I think it was because I read too many fantasy novels as a kid, and there was always this nebulous feeling of destiny. like I was the chosen one, foretold to vanquish auditions for one life to live, and Hannah Montana with talent bestowed by the gods. In my heart, I was certain the sword of stardom would be mine. And no, I'm not reading from my own autobiography. Tim, what's your book?
I was reading from Susan Gerbich's article in the latest issue of Skeptical Inquirer, September, October 2015. On newsstands now, and in your mailbox if you're a subscriber.
Go get it. Eve.
Barefaced Messiah by Russell Miller. The true story of L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah.
Which is complete total loon.
Yep. Complete total loon.
Yep.
Eve read the chapter about his World War II experience out loud to me, and it is the funniest goddamn thing.
We couldn't breathe. We were laughing so hard.
Oh my god! It's like you gave a destroyer to Lieutenant Frank Drebin. It's just horrible.
Wow.
Except it lacks the foresight
gravitas.
And the gravitas.
Well, I'm gonna let Bob and Barbara go last, but and do the reveal last. Mine is this book.
What is it?
Felicia
Felicia Day.
Well, it's kind of a short little autobiography kind of thing, and it's interesting. It's just another geek on the internet that tells cool stories like Will Wheaton and others that have done the same kind of thing. It's a light, easy read and kind of fun. And I know which book Bob and Barbara did this week because Tim and I both did it last week.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
And I hadn't read it, and I got some shit from people.
Yes, we gave Bob shit because he hadn't read it yet. So.
We actually read it on vacation. My husband and my son listened to it without us, and so we played it in the car on the way to Yellowstone and back.
Yeah, the audiobook is good.
It's great.
Yes.
Really good.
You did a good job on it.
Yeah. So, in case anybody's not following along, it's The Martian.
Yeah.
By Anthony
Weir.
Soon to be a major motion picture.
Yeah,
I got the feeling though that just as I was going through the opening pages, that it really is trying to do something other than a story. It's trying to explain, and it's focusing very hard on the science and the engineering stuff.
Well, it's written by an engineer, not a writer.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can tell. You have the same problem with Carl Sagan's Contact. The characters are kind of colored by number Freudian characters, but he gets the science right.
Yeah, he went. Supposedly, Andy Weir went through the science in gory detail, all the math, to the point that it's nowhere mentioned in the book, but he worked out the trajectories for the rockets to do exactly what is described in the book, and in order for those trajectories to work, the story has to take place in a certain year, which he's never revealed to anyone. But he claims that if you really knew your shit and could do orbital mechanics correctly, you could calculate the exact days that the
All right, Maribel, you've been given homework.
What a great puzzle!
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
Y'all don't sound at all like cult members.
No, not at all.
It's a fun book.
You should see. Okay, do you know what we did? We were on vacation reading it, right? So we had nicknames for the cars. Like, some of you probably, or most of you know, Ani Aharonian.
Mm-hmm.
And her husband met us in Yellowstone. And so we were Rover 1 and they were Rover 2. We're texting each other in Martian, in NASA speak and stuff. It was very cute. Yeah. My husband and kids really got into it.
Cool. Awesome. It's a great book. I enjoyed it. I'll science the shit out of it.
It was fun.
Yes. Okay, so that's our long episode, which is interesting how we can go over even though we don't.
Our long, content-free episode.
No.
Hey!
But thank you all for watching.
Male content free.
There you go.
Male content free. There's the logo. There's the music.
Crazy guys.
Virtual Skeptics is an independent production of What'sTheHarm.net, Skeptical Humanities, myself, ICBS Everywhere, and Doubtful News. Our logo was designed by Sarah Mayhew at SarahMayhew.com. The theme music is by Music Hands and News with Thank you all for watching.